Welcome to tonight's webinar, Best Practice Training Tips from a sub 9-hour Ironman finisher with David Glover. And I'm David. And I apologize, Krista was supposed to be here tonight, but unfortunately she had something else come up, so she's unable to participate. So I'll give you a little background about myself because it sort of follows the storyline I'm going to share with you tonight. So, I first heard about triathlon as a kid, so I'm 42 now, so I was born in 71, and I remember watching the Ironman Hawaii on TV, and, there's Dave Scott, and no idea who this guy was, and thinking, wow, that's really cool, but, I could never do that. And even in college, I had one of my classmates, Anthony Baker, he was at the Naval Academy. He had started the Naval Academy Triathlon Club or team, and so I knew a couple people that were doing it, but I was still very intimidated by the sport. And it wasn't until 95, so 2 years out of college, when I was active duty in the Navy as a submariner, that I was diagnosed with cancer at age 23. And it was actually January, so I just hit the 19-year mark this past month. And, suddenly, my life sort of changed, and, I was like, whoa, I'm not going to live forever, and so I needed some way to deal with that, and triathlon became my coping mechanism, sort of my why. And I wanted to prove to myself that although I had cancer didn't have me. And so I entered my first triathlon later that summer, and I had never seen one before except on TV. So I remember showing up at it was one of the Beach's Fine Arts Series sprint races down in Atlantic Beach, Florida, down near Jacksonville, and showed up. I'm looking around, trying to figure out what everyone's doing, asking questions, and someone has a bucket. I need a bucket to wash off my feet, and went in the race. Didn't really, just kind of followed everybody else, and had a really great time. I thought this was really cool. And not long after that, I moved to Reston, Virginia, and turns out my next door neighbor had been doing triathlons for a long time, and even raced briefly as a pro in the 80s. And so I suddenly had a training partner, and he, I remember when we first went out training, he'd just take me out on the hills and just totally stomp me. And it was very, very, very humbling experience, but over time, I developed the skills, and, it wasn't right away. I wasn't a naturally gifted athlete. And so it took me a few years to kind of learn the sport. And then in 96, this is my second year of racing, he said, hey, let's do this Ironman Canada in 97. And that was back when you could sign up for the race, and it was only $260. And I don't even know what it is now. It's probably, and this is the original one in Penticton. Now it's since changed brands, and they've moved the Ironman race to Whistler. But so this is back when it was $260. It just at the time seemed pretty expensive, but pretty cheap now. And still very intimidated. But again, I had someone to train with, and we bought a training plan, and we followed the plan, and I realized the importance of the consistency in training, and having that plan, and it sort of gave me that confidence to say, okay, I know what I need to do. I just got to do most of the workouts. I couldn't get all of them in because I had a job, and I was married, and I had a pet and stuff. And I did my first race, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. And it was probably one of the biggest highs I've ever felt in my life. And I remember, probably for the, week or two after that, I was just riding on cloud nine. So of course I signed up for the Great Floridian Triathlon that October, and did it about, slower, of course, because I hadn't really, I didn't follow the plan as well. But what I realized coming out of that is, the Ironman and even a half Ironman was like a big jigsaw puzzle, and there's all these little pieces, and so it became sort of my quest over the next, 10 years or so to kind of figure out, okay, how do all these pieces fit together? How can I make the most out of my training? And along the way, I've worked with a number of coaches, starting with Troy Jacobson, Olaf Sabatschis, who was a top German pro, and then even more recently, more as a coach to coach, but with Dave Scott. And so I've had an opportunity, and then of course a number of athletes over the years. And for me, my dream, once I had done a couple races, and I was like, wow, I'm pretty good at this, and I suddenly had this, whatever number, I had this sub 9 hour time stuck in my head. And so that became my dream. And so starting from my first Ironman in '97, it took me 10 races to get there, but I finally got there in 2002 at the inaugural Blue Devil, and that's a race that was in Durham, North Carolina. It no longer exists, unfortunately, because they weren't getting very good at numbers. But I remember that I had that dream for so long, and finally achieved it, and then kind of went through a slump, and then but was able to break it 9 hours again in 2007, working with Olaf, and that was sort of the peak of my quote unquote triathlon career. And then since then I've kind of backed off from the racing and training so much and focused more on the coaching side of it. But just want to give you a little bit of background. And as a triathlete, I'm also a race director for Luray Triathlon, and I've written a book. And my claim to fame, the Ironman, which is their full Ironman distance race, it's the longest running Ironman distance race in North America, or in the U.S., I guess. They're coming up on their 25th year this year. It's a great race, a great experience. If you can't get into one of the Ironman branded races, definitely check out Ironman. But they actually put me on the back of their finisher medals in 2007, so that was pretty cool to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. So that's a little bit about my background, and you're going to see how some of those elements play into this presentation. So what this presentation is about you achieving your dream. And I mentioned my dream was to go under 9 hours, and so yours may be completely different. It may just be to finish a triathlon. It may be to finish in your age group, maybe to qualify for Hawaii, whatever it is. But it really comes down, and this is a great quote I came across recently: successful people are simply those with successful habits. So I want to talk about some of those habits. And to start with, before we get into what are good habits to do, let's first talk about the things not to do. I'm going to call these the 5 deadly sins of training. And yeah, I've used this list before, and it actually changes. It's been updated. But when I look back over my own experiences and then working with athletes and talking to the coaches, these are sort of the 5 things that come to the top. And the first one's overcommitted, so taking on too much, so trying to do too much that may be beyond your experience, beyond your ability, beyond your time availability. Too much too soon. And there's a term for this, or several terms for this, but one term is don't be a February star. And by that I mean don't be the person that peaks for racing season in February when your goal race is in June. And I see that a lot, especially with teams and clubs that are working really hard right now this time of year and doing really hard interval sets on trainers, or doing a lot of speed work. So there is a time and place for that. I just don't want to do too much of it too soon. The third is not enough recovery. And recovery is an interesting thing because it's not saying if I go out and work out for 2 hours, I need 8 hours of sleep. It's not quite that one-to-one relationship or 2 to 8 relationship. A lot of things come into play, and we'll talk about those. The fourth is inconsistency, and this is really comes back to I mentioned having a plan and following it, and inconsistency is not having a plan or not following it. And finally, rigidness. So this is being stuck in one line of thinking, or being so rigid about your plan that you don't allow any flexibility, and that can actually create a lot of stress. And I'll give you a quick example on that. When I was really first getting into triathlon and we were doing that first Ironman, I was very rigid about the plan. So if the plan said go out and run for 47 minutes, and if I finished my run in 45 minutes, I would go run around the parking lot for 2 more minutes to get those extra 2 minutes in. I mean, now I wouldn't do that. I remember at one point I needed to do a track workout, so we were driving around Northern Virginia trying to find a track that was either empty or unlocked, and ended up wasting like 2 hours. And was that the best use of my time? No, I could have gone on just a regular run and just approximated the intervals using a watch. So if we think about those things to avoid, what are the better alternatives? And there are these, and I'm going to talk about each of these. So first is conscious commitment. The second is purposeful training periods. The third is listen to your body. You've probably heard that one before. The fourth is follow a plan, and the number five is be flexible. So these are sort of the counter to the 5 deadly sins. Now let's talk about each and give examples. So conscious commitment. This is actually a picture of Krista racing at the Luray Triathlon, and this is probably 5 or 6 years ago. This is a great quote. "Whether I fail or succeed shall be no man's doing but my own. I am the force." So it's great because it means, whether or not you achieve your goals or your success is a lot of it is really dependent on you. And I think, before you figure out what you want to do, what you're trying to accomplish, you have to start with your why. So I mentioned in my story, my why for getting into triathlon. So I was intimidated by the sport, and I didn't do it for a number of years. But it wasn't, when I had cancer, I had a real reason, because I'm like, I'm sick, and I'm sort of in denial too. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to let it get me. I'm going to recover. And so it became my why. So when I was out racing, and I really drew upon this as a strength when I was out racing, especially in these longer races, these halves and fulls, when you're out on the bike for 2.5, 3, 4, 5 hours, and by yourself sometimes, and you're trying to maintain a steady power output and not fade or get distracted. Having that why, that reason that you can draw on, whether it's you're doing it for your kids, you're doing it to raise money for a charity, you're doing it just for yourself. If you can really think about that and draw on that, that can be very, very powerful. And Nietzsche, this is a great quote. I use it a lot, but he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. You could easily say he who has a why to race can bear almost any how. So if you have that why, you can get through your race. You can get to your goals. So what do I mean by conscious commitment? And that's basically exactly what it is. It's understanding your commitment level and making a choice. And there's, you think about commitment, there's sort of a continuum. If you start on the lower left-hand side with less commitment, it's sort of like, I wish I could do an Ironman. I wish I could do a half Ironman. I wish I could do under 9 hours. So it's kind of soft, weak, not very strong. And that's okay. And as you kind of go up the scale, the hope, like, try, want, so that's pretty strong, and commit. So these are, much stronger words. And, the thing to note here, there's no right or wrong, and you may fluctuate up and down. I know, when I was really into Ironman racing, I was really focused on my goal. I was very, very high on this scale, and now, I've sort of accomplished a lot of my goals. So as an athlete, as a triathlete, I'm very much on the low end. And not saying I don't think about doing these things again. I'm just not as committed as I used to. And, key question to ask yourself, and it really helps to do this. One of the things Krista and I both do as coaches, the first thing we have our clients do, in addition to asking them, their goals, their experiences, their background, etc., is, what are your priorities? Write them down. And out of, dozens and dozens of clients we've worked with, between the two of us, we've only had one client that actually listed triathlon as number one. And this was a young guy, wasn't married. He was very focused. His goal was to be a pro triathlete, and that's what he wanted to do no matter what. So, chances are triathlon is not going to be your number one priority. So that may affect your commitment. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. Ideally we want to be balanced, and it's a sport for most of us. I don't think any of us on the call are trying to make living winning races, but obviously there are athletes out there. The cool thing about being in Boulder, Colorado, I get to see a lot of them on a regular basis. At the gym and stuff, and it's very impressive to see their level of commitment, because it's very high. And even today when it's snowing out, and it's I think the high today was in the low 20s. They're probably on their trainers or out running or on the treadmill, doing their workouts. Whereas me, since I'm not focused so much on triathlon as an athlete, I'm more likely to I did a run today, but tomorrow I'm probably going to go cross-country skiing instead. Just figure out where you are, and again, this may change over time too, or even during the season. The second thing is purposeful training periods. So I said the sin was doing too much too soon. So we talk about purposeful training periods, and this is where having we'll kind of get to the plan part, but it's really thinking about, okay, what do I need to do right now? What do I need to do next week? What do I do the following week to get me to my goal race? So we cannot physically, it's not possible to be at 100% peak fitness all the time. It is not possible. So even Olympic athletes are, trying to peak for their specific event so for a very limited period of time, it might be a 3 to 6 week window where you can maintain your peak fitness, and at some point you got to come off. So, when we think about our training, it's really for me, if I say my goal is to go under 9 hours, or your goal is to finish a half Ironman, that becomes sort of your focus, and that's the race you want to peak for. So you don't want to peak now in January and then be flat and stale, up till your race in June. So you want to, kind of think of training, and I like to use this analogy of a funnel. So we're kind of, right now we're sort of in the early season, so the second stage. And I like the analogy of the funnel because what it shows is when I start in the off season, so maybe December, November, January, I've got it's wide at the funnel, so I got a wide range of things I can do. So I don't have to go out and swim, bike, run all the time. I can cross country ski, I can snowshoe, maybe I'll do more yoga, Pilates, whatever. So you have more flexibility. You want to stay in shape, but you don't necessarily need to swim, bike, run all the time. And then as you get closer and closer, so you go into early season, which is pretty much now, in season, which would be, depending on when your races start. For most people, it's going to be maybe late April, May, depending on where you live. And then finally race day. So what this is showing is as you get closer and closer to race day, your training has to become more specific. And there's actually a principle of exercise science called specificity that basically says your body, in order to optimally prepare for an event like a race, you have to train your body in those conditions. So as triathletes, ultimately we have to swim, bike, and run to become better at swim, bike, and run. So if I, cross country ski all winter, I mean, it's great for my overall aerobic fitness, but it's not going to help me in the pool, come March. So just something to think about. So when and this is the advantage of if you have that plan or you have a coach, they're going to, maybe start you out with a more variety of activities, but as you get closer to race day, your workouts become more race-like, so you're doing more race pace type stuff, and it's more specific to what your event is. I'll throw in this because I think it's very important to talk about, and that's both strength training and intervals. People say, well, when do you do them? I mean, obviously in the winter, it's a great time to do strength training because you're not doing as much other training. And then intervals, you think, oh, I want to do them right before a race, so I get fast. Well, you actually want to do them year round. And, I listed out a number of reasons for each. And it's not saying you do a lot of it, but it's good to do some. And I think strength training, for myself, one of the things I ran into is, especially I got into my mid-30s, is just I started getting overuse injuries. So I started having problems with my calves. At one point, I tore my hamstring. Even now, I deal with calf issues. Even though I do a lot of strength training, Pilates, yoga. It's something to very much stay on top of. When you're younger, you can get away with doing less. But even if it's 30 minutes twice a week, that's better than nothing. And then intervals and drills, they're important. And it's not saying you have to go out and do 5 minutes 4 times as fast as you can. An interval might be a pickup during running. So pickup is, I'm going to go out and I'm doing my long run, and I'm just going to, for 15 seconds, I'm just going to pick up the leg turnover. So I'm going to go a little bit faster, not a sprint, but going faster, and then I'll back it off. And I might do 6 of those. So that's an example of an interval. And what both these things do is they train you've probably heard the term slow twitch, fast twitch muscle fibers. But our body, each of our muscles has a mix of these fibers, and they're engaged in the order they're needed. So the slow twitch are smaller, and there are endurance. So they don't generate as much power, but they can go for long periods of time. So if we're doing an easy effort, in my quad, I'm mostly using the slow twitch fibers. But as I go faster, or as I start to do a squat, I'm going to have to engage more of those fast twitch fibers. And the issue, though, if all we go out and do is that long, slow training, we never engage those fast twitch fibers. And the thing is, if you train those fibers, they become more aerobic. So it's important to do a little bit of intervals, even if it's just short 15-second pickups on the bike and run year round. And the same with strength training. So it engages those muscles so that you do train them. So here's an example of a simple run interval progression. And this would be a great workout for this time of year. So this would be part of a longer run. So this might be a 45-minute run that I do once a week. And what I mean by progression is it increases, or it evolves from week to week. So starting with week 1, during my 45-minute run, I'll run out to a hill and I'm going to do 4 by 45 seconds. So I'm going to run up for 45 seconds at a tempo, so like a moderately hard pace. If you're using training zones, it might be a zone 3, maybe a little bit of zone 4. So maybe just when I'm starting to breathing hard and then jog down, I do that 4 times. Well, the next week I'm going to do a little bit more. I'm going to do it 6 times. Next week I'll do it 8 times. And finally, on week 4, I'm going to do 6 by 1 minute. So you can see how it sort of progresses. So it starts out relatively easy, and then I build on it each week. Here's an example for swimming. And again, this would be within a longer workout. So this isn't the whole workout, but I'll just go walk through the first line. So in week 1, I'm doing 4 by 50. So 4 by 50, we'll say it's a meter pool. So 4 by 50 meters. I'm going to do the first 35 fast. So basically a lap, I'm going to go down about a little less than halfway back. And then the last 15 really easy. The next week, I'm going to do that 5 times. So again, I'm going from 4 to 5. The next week, I've gone back to only doing it 4 times, but I've increased the duration, or the distance. So instead of doing 50 meters, I'm going to do 75. And you can see I've broken that down into the first 25 is fast, 35 stretch or easy, and then the last 15 is fast. And that will add up to 75. And then the following week, I've kept the number, the frequency the same, so 4, the distance the same, the 75, but I've changed inside it. So instead of doing 35 stretch in the middle, I'm only doing 25. So I've got 25 fast at the beginning, 25 fast in the end. So these are examples, both for the run and the swim, of introducing a little bit of speed work. And these are actually both great examples of what you could be doing now. And then as you get closer to race day, your intervals are going to become longer. And if you're training for an Ironman, for example, you're not going to be doing really hard efforts for long periods of time, because you can't, but you're going to work on maintaining those moderately hard efforts for prolonged periods of time. So number 3, listen to your body. And this is a great quote too. We will use the actions of others to decide on proper behavior for ourselves. So what does that quote have to do with listening to your body? So this is the time of year when we get sucked into our group training rides, our group spinning sessions, and we, I was guilty of this. I go out and train with my buddies, and we just smash each other and see who can generate the most wattage, and see who can work the hardest, and we'll race each other on the compi trainer, or we'll go out and do a ride outside, and we'll just hammer and try and drop each other, and same with the run. So it's really important to take a step back from what everyone else is doing and figure out, okay, what do you need to do? And there is a time and place for doing those group sessions, because they can be an awesome way to motivate yourself and push yourself, but you just got to be really careful. And there's 2 things I really want to be concerned about as endurance athletes, and I'll talk about both. So the first is overtraining. And there's a lot of different definitions, but the one I came across I liked is basically the athlete is stressed to the point that he or she is unable to recover adequately and performance declines. And basically this is that point where you start to train, and all of a sudden you see your swim times in the pool go down, so you train even more, and you're tired, but then your times go down even more, and you're like, what the heck? I train more, I should go faster. Well, not necessarily. There's sort of that point beyond which your body's like, I've had enough. I can't do this. And it's important to know, and I highlighted this in red, that stress, so your body, looks at stress, pretty much the same, whether it's coming from workout or from home life or from job. So even though your workout stress, so maybe you're following the same consistent plan from week to week, and your body's used to that, and you feel pretty good about it, but all of a sudden you just get slammed at work, and maybe you're an accountant and you're coming up on tax season and you're working all the time, and suddenly, even though your training hasn't really changed that much, you're just tired all the time, and you can't recover. So it's important to recognize that stress can come from other areas than your actual training. So, go back to that conscious commitment. What is reasonable in your life? If you have a family, if you have kids, if you have a spouse, if you have pets, if you have a job, or if you have to travel, those are all factors that may impact what you can and can't do. If I look at some of the top athletes here in Boulder, for a lot of them, their stress is financial because they're not making enough money, but they're not working regular jobs. I mean, they can train as much as they want. They can recover as much as they want. I see a lot of them hanging out in the coffee shops, because they can. So, for most of us, unless that's what we're doing full time, it's unrealistic to be able to train at that level. So possible symptoms of overtraining, and these are, if you go online and search on this, I found a nice chart. I didn't put it up here because it'd be too much, but there's probably anywhere 30 to 40 different symptoms you can find, and these are some of the more common ones, and these are ones that I typically experience when I get overtrained, and fatigue being the big one. You see that performance decline. So even though you're still training, all of a sudden you're like, well, I can't keep up with my buddy, or I just feel flat. Number 3 is a big one for me, and this is one where someone, your friend or your significant other, can help you with. And they said, hey, you're really in a crappy mood all the time. That's actually it could be a red flag for overtraining. Poor sleep. So it's sort of ironic that as we get overtrained, and because we're fatigued, that we then have trouble sleeping. So then it kind of becomes this vicious cycle, and then finally anxiety, depression. So these are all real symptoms, and there's not, depending on who you are and what type of overtraining, and how long, the symptoms you may have different symptoms, you may have some of the same, and it's basically the bigger or deeper the hole you dig, the longer it's going to take you to recover, and the recovery is rest, and and it's hard. You're training for a race, and all of a sudden you're like, I got to take time off, I'm gonna lose fitness, but you ultimately have to do that, and for me, in 1999, got married in 95, and so a lot going on that year with cancer, buying a house, moving, and getting married. And I was going through divorce in 99, and still trying to, at the point I was trying to do 2 Ironman races a year, and at some point that summer I'm like, I just can't do this, so I stopped, and I basically stopped training. It still worked out, but I stopped racing and stuff. Like, it was just too much. There was too much stress, and I was just running myself into the ground, and so I had to back off. The other big thing to worry about, injury, and the study about 10 years ago looked at 131 triathletes, and these numbers, they sort of blew my mind when I looked at them, but 50% had an injury in the 6-month preseason. So that's, you think of the season starting May, June, that's basically now. So, half of the people on this call are going to have some type of injury where they're going to have to, take a break from, maybe if you injure your shoulder, you can't swim for a while, or your calf. And then 37%, so a little over a third, had an injury in the 10-week competition season. So this is a real concern. And I've always said, part of the battle for doing these longer races, like these halves and fulls, is getting to that starting line and not being injured. And so that's where, all these little factors come in that, commit to what you can reasonably do. If you're doing your strength training, you're making sure you're doing that proper warm-up recovery. All those are big factors. So what increases likelihood of injury? I thought this was interesting too. So history of high running mileage, guilty of that. Previous injury. So I've injured my hamstring and calves before, so I tend to get more injuries in my calves, and irritate my hamstring. Inadequate warm up and cool down. So that's key. So if you're doing, especially those harder sessions or that hard strength session, make sure you warm your body up by doing some light aerobic, easy activity. So you get that blood flowing, you get the blood into your muscles. So you don't go from 0 to 60 and stress your body. And same with the cool down. And then increasing years of experience. And, I know for me, gosh, I'm going on almost 20 years of triathlon. It's really over the years it's just become more and more of an issue. So it's something, it's sort of the reality of it. So just the more you can stay on top of it early, the better off you'll be. So this, the old debate, quantity versus quality, comes into play. And I'll give you some examples. So number one, we can choose, if I'm training for an Ironman, I can go out and do a 6-hour ride. I'm probably going to need 3 different stops, because if it's during the summer, I need to get water, I got to fuel, I might have to go to the bathroom. Or B, instead of that, for a long ride, I do a 4-hour ride, but with only 1 stop. But I throw in, so it's not just a 6-hour ride where I'm just kind of plugging along, trying to get in the time, but I'm going to throw in two times 45 minutes of race pace, so an hour and a half of race pace. So it's, again, not a really hard effort, but it's a moderately hard effort. So which do you think is better, A or B? Example number 2, I can go out and do a 3.5-hour long run. I'll call that a slog, slow jog. It may not be that slow, but 3.5 hours is a long time to be on my feet. Or what if I went out and did 2 hours and 20 minutes, but then I threw in some tempo efforts, so some moderately hard efforts mixed in, which is better? And, the answer is, for a lot of things, is it depends. I think, what I found, I used to be more of the A athlete, and then, as I kind of got more experience, I realized, hey, B was often more effective. And, if when I used to train with my good friend Brady in Virginia, when I lived back in Virginia, and he had, a wife and 2 young kids, and, we'd start our long rides at 6 a.m., and he had to be home by 11. So we had to, we'd ride from 6 to 10, and we'd, of course, have to drive 20, 30 minutes to get out to Leesburg, so away from, so we didn't have to ride on the WNOD trail, the bike trail. So it really forced him to do B. And for me, I was like, oh, this is great. I got it out of the way. So we'd be home by 11 and done for the day. And he'd go mow his lawn, and I'd go hang out. So the answer is you can be very effective by doing a little bit less, but throwing in a little bit of that intensity. And it's also easier to maintain that focus and say, okay, I can pretty much work hard for 4 hours. But as soon as I go beyond that, I start to kind of get distracted and, like, do. And same thing with the running. So it's just something to think about. Number 4, follow a plan. Another great quote. In the absence of clearly defined goals, we become strangely loyal to performing daily acts of trivia. So plan basically becomes, a bunch of milestones. So your stepping stones that you get to race day. And if you think of those stepping stones as milestones, those are like mini goals. So, I'm kind of trying to get from week to week, and, over a period of a number of weeks, like if I'm doing a race in June, it might be, 18 weeks from now. I'm trying to get there. So I've got a plan, I want to have a plan in place to get there. And, there's, lots of plans out there. You can, obviously you find a coach. I mean, we have training plans, for different races and stuff. But one thing to think about is, identify and address areas of concern or uncertainty. So, for example, if you don't come from a swimming background and you're real uncomfortable in open water swimming, that's something you want to work in your plan. Get some practice. Practice sighting. If you go to schooloftry.com in the classrooms section, we have a whole bunch of swimming videos, swim drill videos. We have one on, and you can learn how to sight in the pool. So those are things you can practice. If you're concerned about hills on the bike or the run, you want to make sure, say you're doing Lake Placid or Coeur d'Alene, which are both pretty hilly bike courses, you want to make sure you incorporate the hill training into your plan, so when you get to race day, you get that confidence. Write it down. Again, if you buy a plan, it's written down for you. But when you it's still helpful to write down, what are your priorities? Again, we talk about commitment. What are the commitments you have to, family, spouse, job, pets, et cetera, friends. So you want to have some way to gauge your progress. So we as humans, we like to measure things. We like feedback. You can call these marker sets or field tests or whatever you want to call them, but you want to have some way to say, okay, I'm making progress towards my goal, or I'm not. I'm starting to decline in performance. Maybe I need to back off. Non-goal races. So if you're targeting a half or full Ironman this summer, you might want to think about doing a sprint or an international before that. That's a good way to gauge your progress. It's also a good way to kind of get a feel for racing again. Because I know when I don't do a race for a while and then I do one again, it's like, oh, yeah, I got to remember that. And nutrition, hydration. So I mean, that's a whole separate discussion, and we'll do. We did do a webinar on that in the schooltry.com. You go to /library. We did do one last year. We'll do another one this year. But it's very important to figure out what works for you. And the first thing you can start with, if you're doing like an Ironman or a longer race, figure out what they're going to have on the course and practice with it. So figure out if you can even use it. I've had a number of athletes who've tried to use the Ironman drink, and they don't train with it, and they get to race day and they get sick and they're throwing up and their stomach's all knotted up. They're like, well, I don't understand why. And I was like, well, did you train with the Ironman drink? No. And it's got fructose in it, which some athletes can tolerate and some can't. So if figure out if you can tolerate it ahead of time rather than waiting to race day. Consistency. I've talked about having a plan, and part of it is just having that consistency from week to week. And here's just a simple example. For an athlete that wants to do well as an age grouper, I mean, generally recommend you try and do at least three, or three, is a good number of each type of workout. So 3 swims, 3 bikes, 3 runs, and then one of those bikes has a short break afterward. But having some sort of schedule from week to week is helpful because it helps you prioritize, it helps you schedule. I know for me, if I'm focused on swimming, I'll do masters a couple days a week, and I like going to Dave Scott's masters in Boulder, so he has them on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So I'll make Tuesday, Thursday my swim days. So then it's already in my schedule. I'll block it off my calendar, and then I'll go. And then Friday I may just go swim on my own and just do some easy stuff. Takeaway here, prioritize what's important for you. Again, if you're a really strong cyclist, you probably can get away with 2 workouts a week, because maybe you need to focus more on the swim. And then look to complete 70% to 90% of the workouts in a given week. And it's all my years of racing and training, and even when I wasn't working full time, took some time off in between jobs. I could never get in 100% of my workouts, so it's not realistic. So don't beat yourself up if you're going to miss workouts here and there. Life happens. If you can, maybe you don't have time to do your hour-and-a-half long run, but if you can get out for 45 minutes, hey, that's better than nothing. Or maybe you can get in 45 minutes in the morning and 45 minutes in the afternoon. So, it's work with what you can do and try not to beat yourself up. And finally, number 5, and this is sort of the catch-all. Instead of being rigid and kind of locked on, like I have to do this and I've got to get to that track, be flexible. And I love this quote. I collect quotes in this Google Doc, and I think it's up to about 20 pages now. But this is one of the first ones I put in there. But mastery of life is not absence of problems, but mastery of problems. And if you look at this picture, it's at the Luray Triathlon. It's a little bit of a melee at the swim start. And it's sort of like life. I mean, when you start to swim, you don't know what's going to happen. You might get swum over. You might get bumped. You might have someone swim next to you. So try and be flexible. Adapt to it as best you can. And I've realized one of my strengths and also my weaknesses is I'm very hard on myself and very set myself up for high standards. And a lot of athletes do, and we expect a lot of ourselves. But sometimes it can be too much. So just do the best you can. And so now it's up to you. Go achieve your success. And this is Krista. She just done the Columbia Triathlon in Maryland, and she didn't have a PR, but it looks like she had a great race. She's smiling. So, have fun, smile, and again, just do your best. This concludes the formal presentation. And if you guys got a few quick questions, if you can ask them in the chat window, you can just click on the little triangle to open up the window. I'm going to have to run in a couple minutes, but you can always email me afterwards, david@schooloftri.com. Definitely, if you haven't checked out schooloftri.com, it's a free website. It was when we built it. It's sort of my attempt to capture all my knowledge and experience and Krista's knowledge and some other folks while we still have it. And there's a lot of cool videos in the classrooms, and we just started doing a video blog. If you go to schooloftri.com/blog, and we're trying to answer questions each week. And I think we did like 3 or 4 2 weeks ago, 3 or 4 last week. We'll probably film some more tomorrow. So if you ask us a question, it may end up in a video. We won't use your name, of course, but we love questions. And we've also got some upcoming webinars. The first one we haven't done before as a webinar is strength training for triathletes. And Krista she is really strong background in strength training. She's worked with a number of professional teams like the New Orleans Brass and the Baltimore Ravens and the Baltimore Orioles. And she's a number of pro athletes. And she does personal training. So she's really got a good perspective on this. She's always educating herself, and both of us have kind of observed there's a lot of common injuries across triathletes. So this is really geared towards, trying to do things so you don't get injured and, basically building a better body. And then that's supposed to be crash course in triathlon training for beginners. If you're brand new to the sport, this is sort of just an overview, all about, what to expect on race day. And, we'll talk a little bit about training. And then in May, this talk was more on the training side of things. The one in May is more on race weekend and race week. So what to expect. So that we do these folds and halves are a little bit different. You may not have, a transition spot per se. You may have a transition bag. A lot of them you have to check in early. You have to rack your bike early. So kind of walk through some of those things. So it'll be a good overview if you've never done one of these longer races. And then if you have, we'll probably have some good tips for you to help you get faster. And then finally, I mentioned we do have training plans. If you go to School Tri, they'll just basically link you to enduranceworks.net. But if you need a structured program, we've had a lot of success with them, and each year we continue to adapt them. And there's other stuff we do. The webinars and videos complement them very well.